everyone. Good morning or evening or wherever I'm finding you. If you don't know me, my name is Jared. I'm one of the elders here at Soma. We've been in a series called Worship in the People of God. And in this series, we've been sort of examining how God's people throughout the ages have worshiped in their own unique context and how that's played out. And today we face a daunting question. How do you worship in exile in a culture so foreign to any notion of worshiping the living God? And to answer this, we'll be looking through the lens of the book of Daniel. Daniel is an amazing book. It spans multiple literary genres. In addition to being prophecy, it includes history, even apocalyptic passages. It also spans multiple kingdoms, starting out in the Babylonian kingdom and progressing through the Persians and the Medians. And even going through multiple languages. The middle section of the book is actually written in Aramaic, which was a common language, rather than Hebrew, with the express purpose that as many people, as many nations in the world would hear and heed these words. The book of Daniel tells an epic story. It's a story of a people, God's people, taken into captivity by a foreign king. Their homes and temple are plundered, and they're left in utter and complete loss. They're assimilated into a new culture with different gods, where even their names are taken from them and new ones are imposed on them to erase their cultural identity completely. It's also a story of frightening visions. One of these exiles, Daniel, is able to see and interpret the visions of the king. It's a story of fickle worship where the king himself, Nebuchadnezzar, the same king that brought these exiles into Babylon and pillaged and plundered their homes, he has an encounter, although brief, with the living God as he asks Daniel to come and interpret his vision. And Daniel's actually able to do it where none of the diviners or sorcerers are able to. And as he sees this amazing feat of Daniel being able to recount completely his vision, he exclaims, "Truly your God is a God of gods and a Lord of lords and revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." But his praise, although meaningful as it sounds, is short-lived, because soon after this, he erects a golden statue of himself, and he decrees that all men must fall down and worship when they hear the music playing. When King Nebuchadnezzar is told that 3 of these Hebrew exiles pay no attention to him, his gods, or his decree, he flies into a rage. He has them bound and thrown into the furnace. But as he does this, suddenly he jumps up. Something's not right. He looks into the fire and he says, "Did we not cast 3 men in? Yet I see 4 men walking around unbound in the fire and unhurt. The appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." So the other night, my son Camden, he asked me to tell him a story, a Bible story from my mind. And I don't know if he's trying to butter me up or what he's getting at. But I totally take the bait. I'm here for it. And when I get to this part of the story, one like a son of the gods who's with them, I look at them and I ask, who do you guys think that was in the fire with them? And of course, they all proudly pipe up, "Jesus!" So then I ask, wait a second, had Jesus been born yet at this point in the story? Like, you guys know where this falls in the story. And wide-eyed, completely filled with wonder, they conceded that no, he hadn't. Yet there he was in the story, clear as day. Of course, this moment again sways Nebuchadnezzar towards faith as he proclaims, "There is no other God who is able to rescue in this way, to keep people safe in the fire." At this point, the book switches to the first person. So these are King Nebuchadnezzar's very words put down in ink. He gives a proclamation. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. And at this point, he says that he's had a second dream, and he again asks Daniel to retell and interpret it to him. And this vision ends with the Holy One coming down from heaven, ordering that a fruitful tree, which is symbolic of Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, be chopped down, all for the purpose that the living will know that the Most High is ruler over human kingdoms. He gives them to anyone he wants, and he sets the lowliest of people over them. See, right here in the middle, we have Daniel's complete reason for recording this document. That the living will know that the Most High is ruler over human kingdoms. See, and in this verbal praise, although beautiful and meaningful as it is, Nebuchadnezzar is still not acknowledging any rule or any power over his own. He's impressed and amazed, but his allegiance hasn't really changed. His kingdom and his pride is intact. See, this vision ends not only with Nebuchadnezzar losing his kingdom, but losing his mind. He's left as more beast than man. It says he was driven away from his people. He ate grass like cattle, and his body was drenched with dew from the sky, until his hair grew like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. Yet he is not without hope. See, the Holy One in this vision also commands that the stump and roots of the tree in this vision be left with this promise. Your kingdom, Nebuchadnezzar, will be restored to you as soon as you acknowledge that heaven rules. I'm going to pray for us, and we're going to jump in and spend some time unpacking this together. Father, I thank you for the way that you teach us through the scriptures, the way that your scriptures read us, the way they explain the human heart. I pray that as we look into them together today, that you would guide us, that you would bring our hearts to confession and repentance, that you would give us just affection for you, that you would stir our affections and remind us of your love for us. I pray that you would speak through me, and that you would cause our hearts to worship together today, even as we're watching this in different places all around the city. I pray all this in your name. Amen. So today I wanted to take a moment to address the king of our culture. See, in our day, there are no kings literally demanding that we bow down to golden statues. And thanks to this great American experiment, we don't really have a frame of reference for what monarchy is like. But instead, we've enthroned what Herbert Hoover called rugged individualism. It's this idea that you can make something of yourself, and all your fortunes and everything that happens to you in life will be tied to that and that alone. See, and there are pluses and minuses to every worldview shift that passes through a culture, both good and bad. See, democracy brought freedom and lifted many out of poverty, and the resulting rugged individualism had a great effect on the ability of many to climb above their station. But there have also been many negatives. And one of the negative side effects is that the king of our culture is no single individual anymore. The king of our culture has now become the self. And writer Brett Lott explains this cultural phenomenon this way in an interview. He says, "You're supposed to be the smartest guy in the room. You are the king of the quadrant of the universe you've mapped out for yourself to be the king of. And you have a whole campus full of kings marching around, but my king is not me." And that bothers people, because what it says to them who believe they are the king is that I don't believe they are the king either. And that can make some people angry. See, this is the kind of rage fueling King Nebuchadnezzar as he throws Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fire. This uncontrollable rage that someone would dare to question your dominion. This is the kind of rage many of us feel when our dominion is questioned, when someone fails to recognize this life that we've made for ourselves and this dominion that we clearly have, or so we think. This rage comes because with ourselves as king, we too, just like Nebuchadnezzar, begin to lose our humanity. By the time Daniel interpreted that Nebuchadnezzar would become a beast for his failure to acknowledge the rule of heaven, he was already well on his way there. Why is this distinction of kingship, though, so fundamentally shaping to our personhood? Defining our life whether we're more human or beast-like. Why is it so powerful? I think it's because we all instinctively know in our inner being that your king gets to say who you are. See, Nebuchadnezzar tries to give the exiles new names, seeking to define and control them. And when we make ourselves king, we are desperately trying to name ourselves. But it's all shifting sand. It's like making a copy of a copy, where the image just gets dimmer and harder to read and harder to even know what it is. Because what we are naming ourselves by is an ever-changing reality rather than an absolute standard that's unchanging. Especially in this pandemic, where the ways we usually establish our kingdom continue to be laid waste day after day. Just when we think we've got a grip on reality, it changes again. We begin to feel we're losing ourselves rather than making ourselves. Friends, how long will you suffer in exile, in the exile of your own kingdoms? Don't you long for a better name, one that you can't name yourself? Do you want to know who the true king calls you? See, later as Daniel sees his own visions of kingdoms being devoured like beasts by one another, he's overcome and terrified in his own frailty. His skin goes pale and he lays sick for days. He looks at the prophet Jeremiah and he counts the days and the years and he says, surely this exile should be over by now. So he cries out to God and he says, we have sinned and done wrong, acted wickedly, rebelled and turned away from your commands and ordinances. We have not listened. Compassion and forgiveness belong to the Lord our God, though we have rebelled against him. God, hear the prayer and the petitions of your servant. May your face shine on your desolate sanctuary for the Lord's sake. Listen closely, my God, and hear. Open your eyes and see our desolations in the city that bears your name. For we are not presenting our petitions before you based on our righteous acts, but based on your abundant compassion. Lord, hear. Lord, forgive. Lord, listen and act. My God, for your own sake, do not delay, because your city and your people bear your name. See, Daniel could have easily decried the sin of the dominant culture around him. Babylon, Persia, and Media were full of idolatry, manifesting itself in terrible violence and oppression and injustice, where people were often treated like animals by those in power. But that's not what he does here. Instead, he confesses for himself, for his own people. And this may be a word for us. If we find ourselves only railing at the culture around us, especially during this time, pointing out its idols, but not looking within, it may be time to examine what king we are actually serving. When we submit to the true king, we're able to open ourselves up. Our walls can finally come down, and we can actually receive his words. See, immediately, Daniel gets an answer through the mouth of the angel Gabriel. He says, at the beginning of your petitions, an answer went out. As soon as he began praying, before confession ever even happened, at the beginning of your petitions, an answer went out, and I have come to give it for you. For you, Daniel, are treasured by God. The true king calls you a treasured one. When we come to him, confessing our sin, our own kingdoms that are stealing our humanity, acknowledging we bear his name rather than our own, we can hear the true king calling us. And if once isn't enough for us, he repeats this name over and over our lives throughout this entire book. We hear him calling us treasured ones even 2 more times in the next chapter alone. And this time, it's from the mouth of the Holy One himself. See, in Daniel's vision, he looks up. He's been fasting for days, and he looks up, and there was a man dressed in linen with a belt of gold from Ephaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the brilliance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and feet like the gleam of polished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. Hear the thundering words of Jesus calling you treasured one today. That's who you are. His word is true because he's the true king. We know this because we've seen his dominion in action. The true king has always been with you in the fire. Moreover, he has unbound you and set you free. Because of who you are in him, no real harm can come to you. As they faced the fire, that's what enabled the 3 Hebrew exiles to say to Nebuchadnezzar, "But even if God does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up." See, they knew that Yahweh treasured them and that his covenantal love superseded death. It reminds me of what the psalmist says in Psalm 56. "In God I trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? I am under vows to you, O God. I will present my thank offerings to you. For you have delivered me from death and my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before God in the light of life." See, worship in exile is simply knowing who you are, a treasured one of the true king, and acting out of that reality. See, Brett Lott, in his book, Letters in Life, on being a writer, on being a Christian, he puts it this way. The single statement, "I know who I am," is our relationship to the public square. That's it. This posture is the only true way of being God's people in the world. This is how culture is actually transformed and restoration truly happens. And maybe today this feels impossible for you. Maybe you feel more beast than human at times, entrenched as your own king. Remember the promise that was made to Nebuchadnezzar. Your kingdom will be restored to you as soon as you acknowledge that heaven rules. It says at the end of those days, Nebuchadnezzar looked up to heaven and his sanity returned to him. He regained his humanity and he is restored. And this is what he has to say. "I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of the heavens, because all his works are true and his ways are just. He is able to humble those who walk in pride." Friends, let this be the end of those days for us, where we finally look up and acknowledge that heaven rules. For we have the benefit of knowing how the story ends. What Daniel was prophesying about, we can look back and see that it came to pass. That when we had lost our humanity almost beyond hope, hardened in pride, our king humbled himself. He was marred beyond the point of human likeness for us, taking the outward appearance of our inward beastly state. He was cut down for us on a tree, yet he was also the stump of promise left in hope. That death and rebellion are passing away because Jesus, the Holy One himself, awoke from the grave. Because of his acknowledging the rule of heaven, the restoration of the whole world has begun, including us. When we look to heaven and know who we are in him, treasured by God, our lives become part of that restoration story. So as you guys meet with your groups now, I want you to spend some time discussing a few questions to help work these truths deeper into our hearts. So first, what are the things that make you rage because your dominion is threatened? What are the things that take you to blaming culture rather than personal confession? What are the times when you feel like you're losing yourself or your humanity, when you need to look to heaven? What are the stumps in our lives waiting to be renewed when we acknowledge heaven rules? What does it look like for you to know who you are, treasured by God? How might that knowledge ripple out from your life, renewing everything it touches?